Rebecca had always loved her little cabin in the mountains. It wasn't anything fancy, just a cozy two-bedroom place tucked away at the end of a long gravel road, surrounded by tall pine trees that swayed in the wind. She'd bought it 8 years ago, right after her divorce, using most of her savings. It was her escape from the city, her quiet place where she could breathe and think and just be herself without anyone bothering her. She didn't get up there as often as she'd like. Work kept her busy during the week, and it was a 2-hour drive from her apartment in town. But she tried to make it up at least once a month, usually on weekends when she needed to recharge. The cabin was part of a small community called Pinewood Hills, which had a homeowners association that managed the common areas and the main gate. Rebecca didn't mind the HOA fees too much since they kept the roads maintained and handled snow removal in winter. That particular Saturday in late September started like any other weekend trip. Rebecca loaded up her car with groceries, a few books she'd been meaning to read, and her hiking boots. The weather forecast promised clear skies and cool temperatures, perfect for the trails she loved. She left her apartment around 9 in the morning, grabbed a coffee at her usual spot, and headed up the mountain road with her windows down, breathing in the fresh air. When she turned onto her private driveway, something felt off immediately. There were fresh tire tracks in the gravel, which was strange because she'd been the last one here 3 weeks ago. The gravel had been smooth then, marked only by her own tires. These new tracks were deep and recent, probably from the day before or maybe even that morning. Rebecca felt her stomach tighten a bit, but she told herself it was probably just someone who'd gotten lost and turned around in her driveway. Then she saw the lockbox. It was one of those metal boxes that real estate agents use, hanging right there on her front gate like it belonged there. Rebecca stopped her car and just stared at it for a moment, completely confused. She got out, walked up to the gate, and touched the lockbox like she couldn't quite believe it was real. The metal was cold under her fingers. This made no sense at all. She walked to her mailbox, which sat at the edge of the road, and found it stuffed with papers. When she pulled them out, her confusion turned to shock. There were glossy real estate flyers, the expensive kind printed on thick paper with professional photos. And the photos were of her cabin, her front porch with the rocking chairs she'd painted blue, her kitchen window with the flower boxes, the view from her back deck looking out over the valley. The headline read, "Charming Mountain Retreat" in bold letters, and below that, a price, $485,000. There was a description talking about the cabin's features, the peaceful location, the hiking trails nearby. At the bottom was a photo of a man in a suit, smiling confidently at the camera. His name was Brandon Kelsey, and he worked for something called Prestige Mountain Realty. Rebecca's hands started shaking. This had to be some kind of mistake. Maybe there was another cabin that looked like hers, and they'd accidentally put her address on the flyer. But no, she looked at the photos again. That was definitely her place. There was the distinctive rock fireplace she'd spent a weekend refinishing. There was the deck with the unique railing design her friend had built. She pulled out her phone and dialed the number on the flyer. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The phone rang twice before a cheerful male voice answered. "Brandon Kelsey, Prestige Mountain Realty. How can I help you find your dream home today?" "Hi," Rebecca said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm calling about the listing for the cabin on Pine Ridge Road. The one in your flyer?" "Oh, wonderful property, isn't it?" Brandon's enthusiasm came through the phone like he was already counting his commission. "I've actually shown it 3 times this week already. Got a lot of interest. Are you looking to schedule a viewing?" 3 times this week. Rebecca felt like the ground was shifting under her feet. "You've shown it 3 times?" "Yes, ma'am. Lovely place. Needs a little updating, but the bones are solid and that location is unbeatable. The sellers are motivated, so there's definitely room for negotiation if you're interested." "The sellers," Rebecca repeated slowly. "Who exactly are the sellers?" "Well, I'm working with the estate representative. Unfortunate situation, really, but the family wants to move the property quickly." "Are you pre-approved for financing?" "I'd be happy to set up a showing for later today if you're available." Rebecca's free hand clenched into a fist. "I need you to tell me something. What makes you think this property is for sale?" There was a pause. Brandon's tone became slightly less cheerful, a bit more cautious. "I have the listing agreement right here in my files. The estate representative provided all the necessary documentation. The owner passed away and the family—" "I'm the owner," Rebecca interrupted, her voice rising. "And I'm very much alive. I'm standing in front of my cabin right now looking at your lockbox on my gate." The silence on the other end of the line stretched out so long that Rebecca thought the call had dropped. Then Brandon spoke again, and all the confidence had drained from his voice. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" "I'm the owner of this property. My name is Rebecca Chen, and I've owned this cabin for 8 years. I never authorized any sale. I never spoke to any estate representative, and I definitely didn't die. But I have documentation. I don't care what documentation you have. It's fake. You've been showing my house to strangers. You put a lockbox on my property without permission. This is my home." She could hear Brandon shuffling papers, his breathing getting faster. "I need to call you back," he said quickly. "No, you need to tell me." But he'd already hung up. Rebecca stood there in her driveway, staring at her phone, trying to process what had just happened. Someone had pretended to represent her property. Someone had convinced a real estate agent that she was dead. Someone had been bringing strangers through her cabin, her private space, showing them her things and talking about selling her home out from under her. She looked at the lockbox again, then at the flyers in her hand. The anger started building slowly, like a wave gathering strength. This wasn't just a mistake. This was something deliberate. Someone had gone to a lot of trouble to make this happen. Rebecca walked up to her cabin and tried the door. It was still locked, at least. But when she went around to check the windows, she found muddy footprints on her back deck and signs that people had been peering through the glass. Her stomach turned. Strangers had been here, looking at her things, walking around her property like they had every right to be here. She went back to her car and grabbed her laptop. First, she needed to figure out who was behind this. And then, she needed to make sure it never happened again. Part 2, Rebecca sat in her car with the engine running, trying to calm down enough to think clearly. Her first instinct was to call the police, but she needed more information first. She needed to understand how this had happened. The real estate agent, Brandon, had mentioned an estate representative and documentation. Someone had gone through official channels and made this look legitimate. The homeowners association. They controlled access to the community. They had the gate codes. If Brandon and his clients had been coming and going for a week, the HOA must have given them permission. Rebecca pulled up the contact list on her phone and found the number for Gerald Hutchins, the HOA president. She'd met him a few times at community meetings, a retired accountant in his 60s who took his volunteer position very seriously, maybe too seriously, actually. He was the type who'd send violation notices if your grass was half an inch too long. Gerald answered on the fourth ring. "Pinewood Hills HOA, this is Gerald speaking." "Gerald, this is Rebecca Chen from Pine Ridge Road. I need to talk to you about something urgent." "Rebecca, how are you? Haven't seen you at the last few meetings." "I'm not great right now, actually." "Gerald, did you give permission for a real estate agent to access my property?" There was a pause. "Your property?" "Let me think. Pine Ridge Road, yes, I remember now. We received a request from your estate representative about 2 weeks ago. Very sad situation. I'm sorry for your loss, of course, but..." "Gerald, stop. What are you talking about?" "What estate representative?" "Well, the woman who contacted us. She said she was handling your affairs after you passed away, and that the family wanted to sell the property quickly. She had all the proper paperwork, so we provided the access codes and..." "Gerald, I'm not dead." Rebecca's voice came out sharper than she intended. "I'm sitting in my driveway right now, very much alive, looking at a lockbox on my gate that I never authorized." The silence on Gerald's end was even longer than Brandon's had been. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed completely. "That's not possible. We had documentation. Official forms. What kind of documentation? Did you verify it? Did you check public records? Did anyone try to contact me directly?" "Well, no, but the paperwork looked legitimate. It had signatures and..." "Whose signature?" Rebecca demanded. "Mine? How did you verify that?" "We assumed..." "You assumed I was dead and didn't bother to check?" Rebecca's voice was rising again, and she didn't care. "You gave strangers access to my property based on paperwork you never verified?" Gerald's tone shifted from confused to defensive. "Now, Rebecca, we're volunteers here. We do our best with the resources we have. We can't be expected to investigate every single request that comes through." The documentation looked official, but it wasn't official. It was fraud, and you helped them commit it. That's not fair. We were trying to help what we thought was a family in a difficult situation. We had no reason to doubt. You had every reason to doubt. You could have called me. You could have checked the county records to see if I'd actually died. You could have done literally anything besides just handing over access to my private property. Gerald was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was stiff. I'll need to review the documentation we received. Can you come by my office? What office? You work from home. My home office, then. I need to pull the files. Rebecca took a deep breath, trying to control her temper. Gerald, I need you to tell me exactly what happened. Who contacted you? What did they say? What did the paperwork look like? She heard papers rustling in the background. Gerald muttered to himself as he searched through what sounded like a messy pile of documents. Here it is. The request came in on September 8th. It was an email from a woman named Tracy Russo. She identified herself as the family representative and said that you'd passed away unexpectedly. She attached what appeared to be official estate documents and requested that we provide access to the property for the listing agent. Tracy Russo, Rebecca's ex-husband's new wife. The woman he'd married 6 months after their divorce was finalized. The woman who'd sent Rebecca passive-aggressive messages on social media before Rebecca blocked her. The woman who'd apparently decided that identity theft and fraud were acceptable hobbies. Did Tracy provide a death certificate? Rebecca asked, already knowing the answer. Well, no, but she said it was being processed and... Did you ask for one? The document she provided seemed sufficient at the time. Gerald, you can't sell property without a death certificate. You can't settle an estate without a death certificate. Anyone with basic knowledge of real estate would know that. More silence. Then Gerald cleared his throat. I'm not a real estate expert. I'm just trying to keep the community running smoothly by giving criminals access to people's homes. That's not what happened here. This is clearly a misunderstanding that... A misunderstanding? Rebecca couldn't believe what she was hearing. Tracy forged documents and impersonated a legal representative. Your HOA gave her everything she needed to commit fraud. Real estate agents have been bringing strangers through my cabin, taking pictures and treating my home like it's for sale. How is that a misunderstanding? I think you're overreacting. Once we clear this up with the real estate agent, everything will be fine. These things happen. These things shouldn't happen, Gerald. That's the whole point of having an HOA, isn't it? To protect property owners? We do protect property owners. This is an isolated incident that resulted from a very convincing fraud. Rebecca rubbed her temples, feeling a headache building behind her eyes. I want copies of all the documentation Tracy provided. Every email, every form, everything. And I want the names of everyone who accessed my property. I'll have to check with our legal advisor about what I can share. Your legal advisor? Gerald, I'm going to the police about this. And probably a lawyer. You might want to check with your insurance company too, because the HOA is liable for this. She could hear the panic creeping into Gerald's voice. Now let's not be hasty. I'm sure we can resolve this internally. There's no need to involve lawyers or make this into a bigger issue than it needs to be. It's already a big issue. Strangers have been in my house, Gerald. Someone I know personally committed fraud using your HOA as an accomplice. This isn't something we can fix with a friendly conversation. I really think you're blowing this out of proportion. The HOA acted in good faith. We're not responsible for someone else's fraudulent behavior. You're responsible for giving them the keys to my property without doing basic verification. That's negligence at minimum. Gerald's voice hardened. If you're threatening legal action against the HOA, I'll need to end this conversation and consult with our attorney. You do that. I'll be consulting with mine too. But first I'm going to secure my property so no more strangers can wander through it. What do you mean, secure your property? I mean, I'm changing the locks and putting up gates that actually keep people out, since the HOA clearly can't be trusted to protect my privacy. You can't change the locks without notifying the HOA. The bylaws state that we need emergency access to all properties. Rebecca actually laughed, though there was no humor in it. Are you seriously telling me that after you gave my access codes to criminals, you think I'm going to let you keep emergency access? Those are the rules. If you violate the HOA bylaws, we can fine you. Fine me. Send me a violation notice. I'll add it to the lawsuit. She hung up before Gerald could respond. Her hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't just from anger. It was from the realization of how badly this could have gone. If Tracy had been smarter or more patient, she might have actually completed a fraudulent sale. Rebecca could have shown up one day to find new owners in her cabin with legal paperwork saying they'd bought it fair and square. She would have had to fight in court to prove the sale was fraudulent, and that could have taken months or years. Part 3. Rebecca spent the rest of that Saturday afternoon taking action. She wasn't going to sit around and wait for the HOA or the real estate agent to fix this mess. They'd created it through their carelessness and negligence, and now she was going to protect what was hers. Her first call was to a locksmith in the nearest town. It was a small mountain community, so there weren't many options, but she found someone who could come out the next morning. She explained that she needed new locks for her gate and her cabin doors. Plus, she wanted to add some additional security features. The locksmith, a woman named Rita who'd been in business for 20 years, didn't ask too many questions. She'd probably seen worse situations. Next, Rebecca called her friend Diego, who worked in IT security. She needed recommendations for security cameras and monitoring systems. Diego got excited immediately. He loved this kind of stuff. Within 15 minutes, he'd sent her links to 3 different camera systems with detailed pros and cons for each. She ordered the middle option, paying extra for rush delivery. It would arrive in 2 days. Then came the hard part. Rebecca opened her laptop and started drafting emails. The first one went to Brandon Kelsey's broker at Prestige Mountain Realty. She kept it professional but firm, explaining that Brandon had listed and shown her property without authorization, that she had never agreed to sell, and that she expected an immediate delisting and written apology. She attached photos of the flyers she'd found in her mailbox and the lockbox on her gate. The second email went to the State Real Estate Commission. This one included more details about Brandon's failure to verify ownership before listing a property. She outlined the timeline, included all the evidence she had, and filed a formal complaint. She knew this might affect Brandon's license, but honestly, he deserved it. What kind of real estate agent doesn't verify that the supposed seller actually owns the property? The third email was to the police department in her county. She reported the fraud and identity theft, naming Tracy as the suspect. She explained the whole situation, from the forged documents to the unauthorized property access. She requested that they open an investigation and asked for a case number so she could reference it in her other legal actions. While she waited for responses, Rebecca started researching attorneys. She needed someone who handled both HOA disputes and property law. She found a firm about an hour away that specialized in exactly this kind of case. Their website had several testimonials from people who'd fought HOAs and won. She filled out their contact form and requested a consultation. It was getting dark by the time she finished all the administrative work. Rebecca locked herself inside the cabin and did a thorough check of every room. Nothing seemed to be missing, which was a small relief. But she found more evidence that people had been here. There were footprints on her bathroom rug that weren't hers. Someone had moved her couch slightly, probably to show off the fireplace better. In her bedroom, the closet door was open, and she always kept it closed. The violation of her privacy made her feel sick. These weren't just strangers walking through an empty house. They'd been in her personal space, looking at her things, probably commenting on her decorating choices or lack thereof. Had they opened her drawers? Looked in her cabinets? The thought made her skin crawl. She barely slept that night. Every creak of the cabin, every rustle of wind through the pine trees made her jump. She kept imagining car headlights coming up the driveway, more people coming to tour their potential new home. Around 3 in the morning, she got up and pushed her dresser in front of the bedroom door. It was probably overkill, but it made her feel a little safer. Sunday morning arrived with bright sunshine that felt wrong given the situation. Rebecca made coffee and waited for Rita, the locksmith. She arrived right on time at 8 o'clock, driving a truck with her business logo on the side. Rita was probably in her 50s with gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and the confident air of someone who'd spent decades solving problems. "So," Rita said, as she surveyed the gate and the lockbox still hanging there. "Someone tried to sell your house out from under you?" "Pretty much," Rebecca confirmed. "Happened to my cousin in Denver. Different situation, but same feeling of violation. Let's make sure nobody gets past this gate without your permission." Rita got to work. First, she removed the lockbox and handed it to Rebecca. "Evidence," she said. "Don't throw it away." Then she installed a new heavy-duty lock on the gate, the kind that would take serious tools to break. She added a reinforced strike plate and showed Rebecca how the mechanism worked. "This is commercial grade," Rita explained. "Banks use these. Nobody's getting through without your key or a serious cutting torch." While Rita worked on the gate, Rebecca called a local sign company. She wanted something visible, something that would make her position absolutely clear. The person who answered was helpful and didn't seem fazed when Rebecca described what she wanted. "We can have that ready by this afternoon," they said. "We do rush orders all the time." Rita moved on to the cabin doors, installing new deadbolts and smart locks that Rebecca could control from her phone. "You'll get a notification every time someone tries to access these," Rita explained, "and you can see exactly when you locked and unlocked them. Good for peace of mind." By the time Rita finished, it was almost noon. Rebecca paid her, adding a generous tip, and watched her drive away. The cabin felt a little more secure now, but Rebecca knew the real statement would come later. At 3 o'clock, Rebecca drove down to pick up her sign. The owner of the sign company came out to help her load it into her car. "Bold choice," he said, reading what he'd printed. "I like it." The sign was bigger than Rebecca had originally planned, mounted on a sturdy frame that would withstand mountain weather. In large, impossible-to-miss letters it read, "Private property, not for sale. Owner very much alive. Trespassers and fraudulent realtors will be prosecuted." She drove back to the cabin and spent the next hour mounting the sign right next to her new gate. It faced the driveway so anyone approaching would see it immediately. She added 2 smaller signs on either side with the same message, just in case someone missed the big one. Then she printed out copies of her cease and desist letters for both Brandon and the HOA, and laminated them, posting them on the gate alongside the signs. Rebecca stood back and looked at her work. It was confrontational. It was aggressive. It was probably going to make some people uncomfortable. Good. She was uncomfortable too, and unlike her discomfort, theirs was entirely avoidable by simply leaving her property alone. Her phone started ringing almost immediately. Gerald from the HOA, probably seeing the sign through some neighbor's report. She let it go to voicemail. Then a number she didn't recognize, then another. She ignored them all. She knew what they wanted, and she didn't care. Around 5 o'clock, her email dinged. It was from Brandon's broker, a man named Richard. The email was apologetic and concerned in that way that meant their lawyer had reviewed it before sending. Richard expressed his deep regret over the situation and assured her the listing had been removed immediately. He offered a meeting to discuss the matter further. Rebecca noted that he didn't actually apologize or admit wrongdoing, just expressed regret that the situation had occurred. Typical corporate language. She also had a response from the police department. They'd assigned her case to a detective who wanted to meet with her and review all the evidence. The meeting was scheduled for Tuesday morning. Part 4 by Monday afternoon. Word had spread through the Pinewood Hills community like wildfire. Rebecca knew this because her phone wouldn't stop buzzing with calls and texts from neighbors she'd barely spoken to in years. Some were supportive. Others were clearly calling on behalf of Gerald and the HOA. The first person to visit in person was her neighbor from 3 properties down, a retired teacher named Helen who'd always been friendly. Helen pulled up in her old Subaru around 4 o'clock, carefully parking before walking up to the gate. She stood there reading the sign for a long moment before calling out to Rebecca, who was sitting on her front porch. "Can I come in?" Helen asked. "I brought cookies." Rebecca walked down and unlocked the new gate. The action felt good, being the one who controlled access to her own property. Helen came through carrying a tin of homemade oatmeal raisin cookies, looking concerned. They sat on the porch, and Helen shook her head slowly as Rebecca explained everything that had happened. "Gerald is an idiot," Helen said bluntly. "I love my husband, but men his age think everything official-looking must be real. Never occurs to them to actually verify. I just don't understand how he didn't think to call me, or check if I was actually dead." "Because it was easier not to," Helen said. "That's how Gerald operates. He takes the path of least resistance and then acts surprised when it turns out to be the wrong path." "He called me yesterday," Rebecca admitted. "Left a voicemail saying, My sign is embarrassing to the community and violates the aesthetic guidelines, Helen snorted. Of course he did. God forbid you protect your property in a way that isn't visually pleasing. Did you know he sent me a violation notice once because my Christmas lights were the wrong shade of white? Despite everything, Rebecca smiled. I didn't know that. The HOA has gotten too big for its britches. Gerald treats it like he's running a corporation instead of a volunteer organization in a mountain community. You're not the first person he's crossed, just the first with the guts to fight back publicly. That made Rebecca feel a little better, but the warm feeling didn't last long. About 20 minutes after Helen left, another car pulled up. This time it was Dennis, who sat on the HOA board with Gerald. He didn't ask permission before approaching the gate, and his expression made it clear this wasn't a friendly visit. Rebecca, we need to talk about this sign, Dennis said without preamble. It's causing problems. What kind of problems? Rebecca stayed on her porch, not moving closer to the gate. People are talking. They're asking questions. It makes the whole community look bad. The HOA giving criminals access to my property makes the community look bad. My sign just explains what happened. That's not how people see it. They think you're overreacting. They think you're being vindictive. Who's they, Dennis? You and Gerald? Multiple homeowners have expressed concern. The sign is aggressive and unwelcoming. It doesn't fit the character of Pinewood Hills. Rebecca felt her temper rising again. You know what doesn't fit the character of a safe community? Having your HOA help someone commit fraud against you. Dennis's face reddened. That's not what happened. Gerald made an honest mistake. You're blowing this out of proportion and making him look bad. He made himself look bad. He's just mad that I'm making sure everyone knows about it. The board is considering fines for the sign. It violates several of our regulations about size, placement, and content. Fine me. I'll see you in court. This is exactly the kind of attitude that's causing problems. We're trying to work with you, but you're being hostile and unreasonable. I'm being unreasonable? Rebecca stood up, her voice getting louder. Someone forged documents claiming I was dead and your HOA gave them the keys to my house. And I'm being unreasonable for putting up a sign about it? You could have handled this privately. Instead, you're making a public spectacle that affects everyone's property values. Good. Maybe it'll make people think twice about how their HOA operates. Maybe other people will actually verify things before handing over access to private property. Dennis turned and walked back to his car without another word. Rebecca watched him drive away, her hands shaking. She'd never been confrontational like this before. Normally, she avoided conflict, tried to smooth things over, kept the peace. But this was different. They'd violated something fundamental, and she wasn't going to pretend it was okay just to make other people comfortable. That evening, her lawyer called. Rebecca had met with her earlier that day at her office, a confident woman in her 40s who'd spent years handling HOA disputes. Her name was Patricia, and she'd listened to Rebecca's entire story without interrupting, taking detailed notes. I've reviewed everything you sent me, Patricia said now. And I've got good news and complicated news. Start with the good news. The good news is you have an excellent case. The HOA's negligence is clear and well documented. They had a duty to verify information before granting property access, and they failed spectacularly. The fraud case against Tracy is also solid, assuming the police investigation confirms what you've told me. And the complicated news? The HOA is going to fight this. I just got off the phone with their attorney, and they're claiming they acted in good faith based on convincing documentation. They're going to argue that they're victims too, tricked by a sophisticated fraud. That's ridiculous. I agree. But it's going to make this take longer and cost more than a simple settlement. They're also threatening counteractions against you for the sign and the lock changes. Apparently, you violated several HOA bylaws about modifications and signage. Rebecca laughed, though it came out bitter. So I'm the bad guy for protecting my property after they failed to? In their view, yes. They see your actions as escalatory and vindictive rather than protective. Gerald has apparently told the board that you're trying to damage the HOA's reputation. I'm not trying to damage anything. I'm just stating facts, I know. And we'll make that case clearly. But prepare yourself for this to get uglier before it gets better. HOAs hate being challenged publicly. They'll dig in their heels. After the call ended, Rebecca sat on her porch watching the sun set through the pine trees. She'd come up here for peace and quiet, and instead, she was preparing for legal battles. But the alternative was letting this go, accepting what had happened and trusting the same people who'd betrayed her trust to somehow do better next time. She couldn't do that. Wouldn't do that. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. When she opened it, her stomach dropped. It was from Tracy. "I know what you're doing. Drop the charges and we can all move on. Keep pushing and you'll regret it." Rebecca screenshot the text immediately and forwarded it to both Patricia and the detective handling her case. Threatening messages from the person who'd committed fraud against her would only strengthen her case. Tracy was panicking, making mistakes, showing her hand. Good. Let her panic. Part 5. The next few months felt like living in a strange alternate reality, where Rebecca had to fight for something that should have been automatically hers, the right to control her own property. But she didn't back down, and slowly, piece by piece, justice started taking shape. The detective assigned to her case, a methodical woman named Anderson, built a solid fraud case against Tracy. It turned out Tracy hadn't been nearly as clever as she'd thought. The documents she'd forged were sloppy once someone actually looked at them closely. She'd used a free online template for the estate paperwork, and had forged Rebecca's signature so badly that even a casual comparison to real signatures showed obvious differences. The email account she'd used to contact the HOA was newly created and poorly disguised. More importantly, Detective Anderson discovered this wasn't Tracy's first attempt at fraud. She'd tried something similar with her previous boyfriend's property in another state, though that case had been dropped when the boyfriend declined to press charges. This time, there would be no dropping charges. Rebecca made that very clear. The real estate situation resolved faster than expected. Brandon's broker, Richard, realized they had huge liability exposure if this went to court. A real estate agent listing property without verifying ownership was such basic negligence that no jury would be sympathetic. They made Rebecca an offer: a formal written apology, removal of Brandon from her property's records forever, and a settlement that covered her legal fees, plus emotional distress damages. The number they offered was substantial enough that Patricia recommended accepting it. "They're scared," Patricia explained. And they should be. This story getting out would destroy their reputation. Take the settlement and let's focus on the HOA, which is going to be a longer fight. Rebecca agreed. She got a check and a very carefully worded apology letter that Richard's lawyers had probably spent hours drafting. The State Real Estate Commission still went ahead with their disciplinary action against Brandon. His license was suspended for 6 months, and he had to complete additional ethics training before he could practice again. Rebecca didn't feel bad about that at all. Maybe he'd think twice before listing properties without proper verification in the future. The HOA battle was messier. Gerald refused to step down voluntarily, insisting he'd done nothing wrong. But word had spread beyond Pinewood Hills about what had happened. Local news picked up the story, running a piece titled, "HOA's Negligence Enables Property Fraud." The reporter interviewed Rebecca, and she told the whole story calmly and factually. She didn't need to exaggerate or embellish. The facts spoke for themselves. After the news story aired, other people started coming forward with their own HOA horror stories. Apparently, Gerald had been careless with other things too. There was the time he'd approved construction that blocked someone's mountain view without properly reviewing the plans. The time he'd given the landscaping crew access to someone's property, and they'd accidentally cut down trees the owner wanted to keep. Small things individually, but together, they painted a picture of an HOA president who was too comfortable with his authority and not careful enough with his responsibilities. An emergency HOA meeting was called for mid-November. Rebecca attended with Patricia by her side. The community center was packed with more people than Rebecca had ever seen at an HOA meeting. Gerald stood at the front, looking defensive and angry, flanked by Dennis and the other board members who still supported him. But as the meeting progressed, it became clear that support was crumbling. Helen spoke first, detailing a long list of Gerald's careless decisions and explaining how the board had become more focused on enforcing petty rules than actually protecting homeowners. Other people followed, some telling their own stories, others simply saying they'd lost confidence in Gerald's leadership. The vote to remove Gerald as president was overwhelming, 43 in favor, 8 against. Gerald's face went white, then red. Then he gathered his papers and walked out without another word. Dennis and 2 other board members resigned immediately afterward, clearly not interested in serving under the new leadership. The new HOA president was a retired attorney named Christopher, who'd lived in Pinewood Hills for 15 years. His first action was to implement new verification procedures for any request involving property access. His second action was to authorize a settlement with Rebecca for the HOA's role in the fraud. "We screwed up," Christopher said bluntly at a meeting with Rebecca and Patricia. "The previous board failed in its basic duty to protect homeowners. We're going to make this right." The settlement included compensation for Rebecca's legal fees, her security upgrades, and damages for the violation of her privacy. It also included a formal letter of apology that would be sent to every homeowner in Pinewood Hills, explaining what had happened and what new safeguards had been put in place. Rebecca negotiated one additional term. The HOA would create and fund an annual audit of their security procedures, ensuring this kind of negligence couldn't happen again. The insurance company that covered the HOA's liability was less pleased about the whole situation. They paid the settlement, but Rebecca heard through the grapevine that they'd significantly increased the HOA's premiums and required additional oversight. Apparently, enabling fraud was expensive. Tracy's criminal case concluded in February. She pleaded guilty to fraud, forgery, and identity theft in exchange for probation instead of jail time. The judge made it clear this was a generous offer she probably didn't deserve. Tracy was ordered to pay restitution to Rebecca, complete community service, and stay away from Rebecca entirely. At the sentencing hearing, Tracy stood up and offered an apology that sounded rehearsed and insincere. Rebecca didn't care. This wasn't about getting Tracy to feel genuinely sorry. It was about making sure there were consequences for what she'd done. Rebecca's ex-husband, Tracy's husband, never reached out directly, but she heard from a mutual friend that he'd been horrified when he found out what Tracy had done. Apparently, he hadn't known anything about the fraud scheme. Whether that was true or not, Rebecca didn't know and didn't particularly care. That was his problem to sort out. By spring, things had finally settled into a new normal. Rebecca returned to her cabin on a Saturday in late March, parking in her familiar spot and unlocking her heavy-duty gate. She'd replaced the aggressive sign with something simpler: private property, no trespassing. The point had been made. Everyone who needed to know the story knew it. She didn't need the confrontational message anymore. She'd used part of the settlement money to make improvements she'd been putting off. New deck furniture sat on her refinished deck. Solar panels on the roof meant she had backup power. The security cameras were discreetly installed but comprehensive. But the biggest change was internal. Rebecca felt safer here now, not because nothing bad could happen, but because she knew she could fight back when something did. She'd also noticed an interesting side effect of her very public battle. Other HOAs in the region had started changing their policies. The local HOA management companies were all implementing stricter verification procedures. The story had scared them, made them realize how easily negligence could turn into liability. One HOA manager had actually called Rebecca to ask if she'd be willing to speak at a regional conference about property security. She'd agreed. If her nightmare could prevent someone else from going through the same thing, then maybe it had been worth it. Helen stopped by that afternoon with more cookies. They sat on the new deck furniture, drinking coffee and watching the mountain view. "You know people are still talking about you," Helen said. "You're famous in Pinewood Hills now." "Infamous, probably. No, famous. Most people think what you did was brave. Gerald and his friends are still bitter, but they're the minority. You changed things here, made people wake up and pay attention to how the HOA operates." Rebecca thought about that. She hadn't set out to change anything except her own situation. But Helen was right. The ripple effects had spread further than she'd expected. "Do you regret how you handled it?" Helen asked. "Some people think you could have been less confrontational." "Those people can have an opinion after someone tries to steal their house," Rebecca said. "I protected myself the best way I knew how. If that made some people uncomfortable, well, I was uncomfortable too when strangers were walking through my home." "That's what I told Dennis when he complained about you," I said. "She was protecting herself from your failure to protect her." He didn't like that much. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the pine trees sway in the breeze. Rebecca's phone buzzed with an email. It was from Christopher, the new HOA president. The annual audit she'd negotiated had been completed, and he wanted to share the results with her. The report showed comprehensive new safeguards and procedures. Things really were changing. That evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Rebecca thought about everything that had happened. It had been exhausting and stressful and sometimes scary. She'd had to become a different version of herself, someone more confrontational and less concerned with keeping the peace. But she'd also learned something important. Sometimes peace wasn't worth having if it came at the cost of your rights and dignity. Her cabin stood secure, truly hers in a way it might not have been if she'd let the fraud attempt slide. The new gate and locks were physical reminders that she controlled this space, that no one could take it from her through carelessness or malice. And the legal victories, the settlements, the policy changes, they were proof that fighting back had been the right choice. Rebecca unlocked her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the number for the regional HOA conference organizer. She confirmed her speaking engagement and started making notes about what she wanted to say. Her story wasn't just about what had happened to her. It was about what could happen to anyone when the systems meant to protect them failed. And more importantly, it was about how ordinary people could stand up for themselves even when it seemed easier to just let things go. The mountain air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of pine and possibility. Rebecca smiled to herself. She'd come through something hard and come out stronger on the other side. Her cabin wasn't just a building anymore. It was a testament to resilience, to standing up for yourself, to refusing to be a victim even when the people who should have protected you failed. And that was worth more than any settlement check.